black-eyed children next on Coast to Coast AM. A number of topics chill me, but man, the one about black-eyed children just sends me for a loop. David, this is always scary. How are you?
Good evening, George. Thanks for having me on again. It's always great to chat.
My pleasure. For the new people who come to Coast, and we get lots of them, when we hear of black-eyed children, they're probably saying, what's that? Give us a little overview.
Well, the people who encounter them are still saying, what's that? Essentially, a short description. These are children who are showing up at people's homes, places of business. They're approaching cars and parking lots. They're generally described as being somewhere between 10 years old and the early teens. They're described as having very pale skin, monotone voices, and, of course, completely solid black eyes, hence the term that we now commonly associate with them, black-eyed children, or BEKs, black-eyed kids. What happens typically in these encounters is that these children will approach a person and they will ask for something. They'll knock on someone's door and ask to come in out of the rain or come in for a drink of water. Often the phrases are very odd. We just thought we'd stop in for a while. And these are children that, the resident has never seen before in their life.
Yeah, they're not like neighborhood kids, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Typically, when they approach, they are sort of holding their heads down, so they're not making direct eye contact initially. And people describe a growing sense of concern initially. Obviously, it's a child, so it sort of takes people off guard. We're sort of hardwired to help children if they're asking for something.
Are there ever any black-eyed parents with them?
It's interesting you ask that, George. There are a couple of cases that have come to light where adults are appearing with these children. And actually, something I thought we'd talk about a little bit tonight is the fact that there are a growing number of accounts now of black-eyed adults showing up and approaching people, just completely without the children. Now, that's sort of interesting because really the first significant modern case of these black-eyed children goes back to 1996 with a gentleman named Brian Bethel. It's probably the most famous encounter at this point. And his encounter occurred in Texas in 96, and he had a situation where these two kids approached him in a parking lot. And, he was sitting in his car writing a check, and they approached his car window and started asking him for a ride. They said they wanted to see a movie, and he had the sense of mind to look up at the marquee and realize that the movie was, pretty far into the last showing, and it didn't make any sense what these kids were asking. And he had this sense of concern that accelerated. He started feeling short of breath. He was very nervous, and suddenly these kids make eye contact, and he realizes that they've got solid black eyes, no whites at all. And at that point, the fear just sort of spikes. He throws the car in reverse, and he gets, out of the parking lot as quick as he can. Interesting enough, as he's pulling out of the parking lot, he looks in the rearview mirror, and these kids have vanished. And that's very typical in these encounters. People will slam the door on these children when they reach that peak of fear, and they just want to get away from them. They'll go over and look out the window, and these kids have vanished. They're nowhere to be seen.
David, what happens if you let them into your house or if you let them into the car?
There's one really significant case that is covered in my book, wherein a black-eyed child was in for lack of a better word, a victim's car. And that particular incident, I don't remember if we've spoken about it before or not, but essentially what happened was a woman had her 10-year-old child in the back seat of her car. Live in a small town. She's on her way home. She stops by the convenience store, jumps out, leaving her child in the car, goes in to grab her loaf of bread or milk or whatever, comes back out, and this really will creep you out, George. You can imagine
just what I
woman,
need to know.
We've all been there sort of on autopilot. She jumps back in the car, tossing the groceries in the passenger seat, turns over the engine, and as she does, she's automatically looking in the rearview mirror to check on her child. And when she does that, staring back at her in the rearview mirror is a little boy with solid black eyes,
Oh,
sitting directly beside her son. Now, that's sort of odd to begin with. He's sitting in the middle of the back seat as opposed to on the passenger side in the back seat, as a normal person would probably do. So he's making physical contact with this young boy. Her fear spikes immediately. She really she goes from complete calm to instant fear in a matter of seconds, jumps out of the vehicle, yanks open the back door and pulls her son out and runs back in the convenience store. Now she gets inside and she's sort of, stuttering and stammering, and the clerk is rushed around knowing something's wrong, and, all she can get out is that there's somebody in her car. The clerk rushes out. There's the vehicle, both doors standing open, no one around. No sign of a child, no sign of anyone else. It's a very open parking lot. This child would have had to have been the flash to get away, and out of sight from this situation. So the aftermath of this encounter was that this woman was so frightened she wouldn't admit to the clerk what had happened. She didn't know what to say, and all she wanted to do was call her husband and have him come up to the store. They didn't live very far away. Now, she didn't explain what had happened to her husband over the telephone, just that she needed him to come up there, and she would explain it all when they got home. So he comes up to the store. They switch vehicles because she doesn't even want to get back in her vehicle. He drives her vehicle back to the house.
Yeah.
On the way home, he's in a wreck and totals the car. So he ends up in the hospital. Fortunately, he had, what turned out to be fairly minor injuries. They kept him for observation for possible concussion and so forth. He has no recollection of what happened except that the last thing he can remember was smelling a foul odor in the vehicle. Now, the wife didn't relate this aspect. She didn't remember a smell, but he remembered something. The people at the hospital concluded, it must have been some kind of a gas leak or something that caused you to pass out. Now, the further disturbing aspect to this encounter was that here we have this 10-year-old boy who had let this black-eyed child in the vehicle, and when the mother finally talks to him and she says, she's trying not to alarm the child, who doesn't really get what's going on, what's the problem here. She talks to her son and she said, do you know that boy from school? And the response was, no, Mommy, I don't know him. And
they just
she pressed
pop
him
up
more for, why did he get in the car? The son says, well, I thought we could go to my house and play.
Oh, great.
So, here's this innocent child, just seeing a potential playmate.
Sure.
Lets this black-eyed kid in the vehicle, has essentially physical contact with him. The disturbing aspect, George, is that this 10-year-old boy became ill. They took him to the doctors, of course, and when they did, the doctors began to attempt to diagnose what was wrong with this child.
And I bet they had no idea.
Well, the issue was the symptoms kept changing. They thought at one point this child had the measles because he broke out in a rash. Okay, we've got it figured out. That's what it is. What appears to be measles goes away. They thought he had a virus. They thought he had appendicitis. They're completely puzzled because every time they think they figure something out, his symptoms change. The parents, eventually obviously just get very frustrated and, they're still frightened for their child. And they end up taking the child home and trying to decide what to do. And over the course of how all this played out, they ended up just sort of calling on friends and family and having prayer visuals for this child and sort of going back to a more spiritual lifestyle, which they had not had before. They were not, strongly religious people when all this happened.
Did it work for them?
It did, and they believe at this point that it was prayer that saved this boy.
I think so.
Eventually, all the symptoms went away.
David, we're coming back for more with you as we talk about black-eyed children. We'll also talk about Slender Man next. And welcome back to Coast. We are with David Weatherly. A couple of his books, The Black-Eyed Children, Strange Intruders. David, these children, these black-eyed children, where do you think they're coming from?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. My personal theory is I think these are some type of interdimensional creatures, for lack of a better word. I don't think they're children at all. I think they're something that is able to assume the form of a child in order to catch people off guard. And, we're starting to see some interesting things in science now. Science has been talking about other dimensions and parallel universes and so forth quite a bit the last few years. It used to be science fiction, and now quantum theorists are talking about, no, we know there are other dimensions of existence, and we're just not sure how to get to them. But that doesn't mean that whatever's there doesn't know how to get here. When you go back to old tribal and cultural lore from around the world, you find very similar things. People that ancient peoples that talk about these beings that used to live here, and at some point they left, whether they left through a shimmering doorway or a hole in the sky, or perhaps in a craft. And I think what they were trying to interpret was that they were seeing something that went into another level, another dimensional existence. And I really think that that's what we're seeing at this point. A lot of portal areas around the world, and people in the paranormal have been talking about this for years, people like John Keel, these window areas where a lot of strange things happen in a collected space, and that those are possibly points of entry for these things.
Okay, this hour, let's take your questions and calls with David Weatherly as we talk about primarily those black-eyed kids when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. David Weatherly with us. Black-eyed children. David, has there ever been a case where, let's say, parents come home and they've left their kids there, and the kids have let the black-eyed kids in? And
I've
they are.
not heard any cases like that, no.
Okay, we don't want that. Do they normally show up alone or with another child?
They're often by themselves. There are plenty of accounts where there are two of them. More often we see that they're boys, but there are some occasions where there'll be a boy and a girl. And there are a small handful of cases where there are more than two of them. There's a bizarre case from London where they actually multiplied as the gentleman was standing there having this encounter with them.
How are they dressed?
There's some variation. Some people say that they're dressed in what they describe as baggy or shabby clothes. It look like they're, not quite the right size. They're not fitting quite right. And we're not talking about, the style that sort of some of the young people wear these days. They're saying, no, the clothes look sort of old-fashioned, but they look like they're not quite the right size. So it's weird. We get into some similarities with the Men in Black encounters, when we go into some of these things, the monotone speech, the lack of understanding of what something common is. There's a really kind of an amusing incident where a woman, heard someone knocking on her door, and they always knock, which is kind of unsettling.
Never the doorbell, huh?
Right, and this particular woman, she was in the middle of trying to finish some particular project, and she just had a couple of things to put in place, and this knocking would not stop. It's just this consistent long knock. And she got frustrated. She threw the stuff down. She rushed to the door. She flung the door open, and before she even recognized who was standing there, said, "Why didn't you use the blankety-blank doorbell?" And pointing to the doorbell, well, here are these kids. And this child looks from her to the doorbell, back to her, as if he has no concept of what she's talking about. What do you mean doorbell is? And then of course, she has the encounter unfolds, and she realizes these children have black eyes, and she can't get the door shut fast enough at that point.
All right, let's go to the calls for you. We've got a Skype caller, first of all, from Brian in Surprise, Arizona. Hey, Brian, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for accepting my call also.
Sure thing.
My take on it is I think that the black-eyed children are actually demons in human form to get us to speak back with them to try to infiltrate our lives.
What do you think of that, David?
That's one of the most popular theories. When I looked at these accounts overall, the two most common things that people believe they are either some type of alien human hybrid, or that there's some kind of demonic presence. And there are a lot of things in common with typical, demonic encounters. They always try to get an invitation. They never, there are no cases of them barging into someone's home. And they always want to be invited.
I think they have to be invited for some reason.
Exactly. So, we sort of get into, demonic lore or even the classical vampire tale that, it has to be invited across the threshold because it's an evil presence of some type, and you have to ask it to come in. And, of course, they'll do so in creepy ways. They'll say, just let us in. This won't take long.
Okay, let's go out to Westchester County in New York, and that would be Hastings-on-Hudson in New York. Dan's with us east of the Rockies. Hi, Dan. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you, George?
Good, sir.
I love your show.
Thank you.
Your caller, your guest was talking about Philip the Talking Table, and I just couldn't resist calling because I actually took part in the Philip the Talking Table experiment in Toronto in 1975. I was researching a book I was writing at the time called Something's There, My Adventures in the Occult. And so actually I went there a few days early, and I talked to George and Iris Owen, who were the people who started the experiment. And they had a society called the Toronto Society for Psychical Research. And they were they were amateurs. They weren't professional parapsychologists, but they just got together once a night for years. They decided to create a poltergeist, and they decided to give him a name. They called him Philip. They gave him a very tragic story. He was killed by his jealous wife because she found out he had a lover, and so on and so on. And they gave him very specific story, and they could all concentrate on this character. And it took them years of sitting around the table with their hands on the table, and eventually they got the table to start rapping, once for yes and twice for no, and eventually they got the table to actually levitate. Now, when I was there, there was another guest besides me, a very famous British biologist at the time named Lyle Watson, who had written a book called Supernature. I don't know if you know that book, but it was an incredible book. And I didn't particularly like him because he was very handsome and very self-assured and very rich and very famous and so on. But he and I both took part in the experiment. We put our hands on the table and so on. After a while, the table started answering questions by rapping yes or no, and then it started levitating. And I will tell this from the story years later. I won't tell you the end of it until I tell you what happened. Years later, I was in a bookstore, and I saw a book called Gifts of Unknown Things by Lyle Watson. And I was thumbing through it, and I see a chapter called Philip the Talking Table. And I thought, wow, he and I were there the same night. Let's see what he said happened. And he said there was an American photographer or journalist, he called me, and he said at a certain point the table levitated and started chasing this American around the room. And I said, that never happened. That guy's a liar. I was there, and I will check my own book to make sure. And I checked my own book, and it said at a certain point the table levitated and started chasing me around the room. And I guess I was so unsettled by the experience that I totally blocked out of my memory. But it is there in my book describing what I totally forgot.
David?
Wow.
There's...
Well,
David,
Dan, first of all, thanks so much for calling in. I'd love to speak with you further, so please contact me through my blog if you would. Yeah, this is an amazing experiment. I tell you, not a lot of people are aware of it at this point. But again, a small group of people focusing their mind and energy on creating this spirit. So, imagine what would happen with masses focusing on the same thing.
These episodes that occur worldwide, you would say?
Which particular episodes?
With all these children.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes. They're spread around the world at this point.
And how would you rate the United States in terms of numbers of reports compared to these other places?
It's pretty high, but I think that is in due part to the fact that the paranormal has sort of become part of pop culture in the last 10 years or so.
That's true.
So people have become a lot more comfortable speaking about, UFO sightings and ghosts and cryptids and things like that. I always joke because, I started investigating this stuff, George, when I was, just a teenager in the 70s. And, as I grew up pursuing these things, I could go to a party, and if I mentioned that that's what I did, I was guaranteed a nice quiet evening alone. And, it's sort of the reverse now. If I go to a party and people find out that's what I do, they're lined up out the door because they all have a story to relate. So, there's a level of comfort within these, with these topics that really we haven't seen in a very long time. And it's starting to spread some to other countries. I've been in Europe a lot the last couple of years, and, things are getting a lot more open there, too, in these terms.
Okay, let's go to Richard. Now, Richard is overseas and has to be anonymous, so let's check in with him. Go ahead, Rich. We'll respect your wishes, but you are on with us.
Hi, is this George?
Yes, it is, Rich.
How you doing, George?
Good.
I just got to thinking about these black-eyed children. Where do they come from? Who are they? And my feelings are that it's possible that how we've had alien abductions, especially of females, and they say they impregnate them, and 9 months later they become a baby. Could they possibly be the children that are the mother that's been a hybrid that's been abducted? The mother has been abducted and used for fertilization.
Are these the offspring, David? Possibly.
That's the other possibility. We touched on this briefly earlier. The two most popular theories to explain what these things are either something demonic or some type of alien-human hybrid. And it's hard not to see the comparison. We're talking about physical beings that have pale skin and those big black orbs, very similar to the little gray aliens that are so common in ufology now. And if you think about the possibility of some type of hybrid being, what that would look like, artist conceptions come out pretty close to something that looks like a black-eyed child.
Are the eye sockets bigger on these children?
Some people say that they're slightly bigger. Now, it's interesting because there are some older cases that have started to come to light. And there's a really fascinating one, George, that I recently learned about that occurred in Ain, France in 1974. And, they're now calling this the black-eyed children of Ain, France. And these two gentlemen, it's a beautiful day in late fall, and they decide to go for a drive. They're driving through this little town. They reach the town limit, and the last house in the town, they decide they're going to turn around and head back in the other direction. And when they pull into the courtyard of this house, they see 5 beings that are about 4 feet tall. Now, here's the description. They have long hair. They're wearing what appear to be dresses with multicolored spots on the dresses. They have earthy yellow skin and eyes described as the size of billiard balls that are solid black. Now, these weird figures, 3 of them are sort of off to the side. One of them is standing by the house with both of its hands on the house, as if it's just feeling the side of the house. The 5th figure is in the middle of the courtyard, and puts its hand sort of up in the air, almost like a greeting. But what happens, these two gentlemen, the passenger has rolled his window down to sort of get a better look as to what's going on, and he regrets it almost immediately because he makes eye contact with this creature. And when he does, he goes into a complete state of fear. I mean, he just feels terrified. And this being sort of waves its arm as if saying, come out of the car. And at this point, these guys are both panicking, and the passenger is yelling, please, get out of here, get out of here. And they drive away as quickly as they can. Now, the interesting follow-up to this is that the two gentlemen, they rush into town. When they get back to the village, they get a couple of other people, and they go back to this house to see if these five figures are still there, and they're not. They've disappeared. When an investigator showed up several months later to look into the encounter, he found a neighbor that said, oh, yeah, there was really something strange that day because I saw a group of children wearing yellow oilcloths standing in the courtyard of that house. So this is an independent verification that there were some type of strange figures there that day. And this is 1974. So this is well before, the common term black-eyed kid or black-eyed child, and well before the well-known Brian Bethel encounter.
Let's go out to Michelle now in Marinette, Wisconsin. Hello, Michelle. Go ahead.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing.
I have two things that I want to comment on. I do want to comment on the black-eyed children, but not until after I mention something about the Slender Man, because I'm from Wisconsin and those two girls. So you said that they are being tried as adults?
Yes.
I didn't even hear that news.
Yes.
And I just, that just struck to my heart because they're 12 and 13, and what they did was gruesome and terrible, but to try them as adults, I just can't understand it, especially since they were so easily manipulated from the internet, that they wouldn't see that these are children who did something horrible, and that really upset me. But that's all I wanted to say about that. But with the black-eyed children, so he's saying that the eyes are entirely black. There's no whites to the eyes. Is that correct?
All black.
Oh. And how long so the first report was in 19...
When did these start, David?
What I call the modern wave of these encounters started in 96 with the Brian Bethel encounter. But when I researched the book, I started finding encounters that went much, much further back than that. So, we're finding accounts from the 70s, the 1950s, and even earlier. The trick is when you go back to these earlier accounts, you can't go back and search for black-eyed kid encounters because that particular term is, what was applied to them after the Bethel encounter. So you have to sort of look through the cultural lens of the time period or the location, and you'll find these same type of entities appearing, but people are calling them, demons or ghosts or a wide variety of things.
Do I have another? Am I still on?
Go ahead, Mish.
Okay. My question is, could this all be caused, like you said about this mass consciousness, by Hollywood and the viewing of all kinds of, science fiction and things, and because people's minds are fragile at times, they can maybe see things in a different light based on the fact that they were, watching a lot of movies. I'm wondering if there was anything prior to mass movie viewing. That's kind of what I was wondering. And as you said, the 50s, 60s, yeah, that would fit. So I kind of think that it's
maybe.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking my call
Michelle.
again.
Appreciate you being part of the program. It's just a bizarre phenomenon, David. It really is. I'm beginning to think, though, they may be hybrids.
It's a very weird phenomenon, and I tell you, George, even when I was researching it, I would look into different aspects of this thing and think, okay, well, wow, this makes a lot of sense that they're probably, hybrid beings. But then you focus on a different aspect of the encounters, and you think, wow, these these things have a lot in common with demonic entities,
Sure
and
do.
that's one of the things that really fascinated me about the phenomena was that it really crosses the line into a wide range of different paranormal subjects. You can equate them to the Men in Black, the demonic entities, jinn, hybrids, a whole wide range.
It's all tied together. David, we're going to come back and take some final phone calls with you in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast to Coast. David Weatherly with us. Your final questions and phone calls as well. Great topic, David. I got to tell you, when I met you at a conference years ago and you had mentioned you were doing this, I went, this is going to be amazing. I bet you get a lot of responses wherever you go, don't you?
Yeah, I do. It's just a very compelling topic, and people are fascinated to know more about it. And again, because it crosses the lines into so many different areas of the paranormal, you get a wide range of people looking at it and trying to, figure out exactly what's going on here. I'm happy to see that a lot of other researchers are now addressing this, and I hear all the time that someone else is writing a book about it. So eventually, I'm sure there'll be a lot more information out there. And I know that other researchers, consistently get stories and accounts. Dave Schrader still gets a lot of accounts, and Jason Offa, Nick Redfern, a lot of these guys are receiving black-eyed kid encounters, and they're different ones from the ones that people send me. So there are a lot of these accounts out there that still haven't surfaced.
I know you do a lot of stories on this. Are you scared about these?
Actually, no. I certainly don't want them showing up at my door.
No.
But
or playing with kids.
I guess I have a propensity to sort of dive into this stuff after having done it for so many years and pursuing it. I think, to be honest, that the jinn are more frightening. And
yeah, you come home. Look, Daddy, my new friend. Hi,
yeah.
Mr. Weatherly. I'm here. All right, let's go to the phones. We'll go to Simi in North Carolina. Hello, Simi. Thanks for calling.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, David. Hey, when you were talking about the jinn earlier and describing them, it reminded me of the archons. It was kind of the same description of like fallen angels that
a little bit
didn't like humans and
mm-hmm.
invoking fear and control kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, it could
You
be.
know about the archons?
A lot of similarities there. A lot of similarities. The jinn, is essentially are interpreted through the Middle Eastern lens, so to speak. And the thing to bear in mind is that Islam has now spread all over the entire world, and those cultures interpret the jinn in some places slightly different. For the most part, in the Middle East, people they won't talk about the jinn because
they
believe,
think it's a sin, don't they?
Well, they believe that if you talk about them, it draws their attention, and that it's not attention.
Manifestation again. Here we go.
Right. So, but yet, you go to some areas of Asia, for instance, and you find some fascinating things because some of the folk traditions have blended with Islam over there, and there are some of these groups that attempt to utilize the jinn. Will intentionally try to bind them into a ring or a knife and things like this in order to access their power.
Do these black-eyed children, do they laugh?
The black-eyed children, they don't really display much emotion. It's, they're always very monotone.
Huh. They don't cry,
they
nothing.
Communicate with people, and they're not really, there's not really those types of encounters with them for the most part.
Do they get mad if you don't let them in?
People perceive that because they tend to get not overtly angry, but they become more insistent. And, they start to demand a little bit. Some people believe that they're attempting to exert mind control, because people have these experiences where they'll feel their hand slipping off the door or pushing it open slowly as if they're about to comply with the, insistent directive to just let them in. And then something sort of snaps and they realize, oh, what am I doing? I can't let these kids in here.
Let's go to Lawrence in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Lawrence, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, y'all. Now, George, you're Turkish, and so perhaps you may know about the bad eye protector, which I think some Turkish people or people in the general region of the Middle East use to protect themselves against
called a nazar.
Disease and the
nazar. Knows it. That's
mm-hmm.
right. With Turkish, Lebanese, everything else, everybody's from that region, and they left in the 1920s. But David, explain this eye patch.
Well, the nazar, this relates more to the evil eye, which is the most widespread, quote, superstition in the world. And it's this concept that someone can project negative energy by, giving you what used to be called the evil eye, a glaring look, casting, energy at you by looking at you. And long, long ago in Turkey and in other places, they developed protections against this. And one of the most well-known protections is called a nazar. It's usually a glass amulet that is made out of blue glass, and in the center is a white ring with a dot in the middle.
And it covers your eye.
Sort of looks like an eye. Well, there's some cultures that used to do that, but it's not. It's a necklace that is worn.
Huh.
In order to ward off the evil eye. So it's sort of this idea that it's an eye that wards off the eye, that it's glaring back, so it prevents that energy from being projected at you.
So they don't put it on your eye?
No, it's a glass amulet that is worn on on a piece of string. You'll find them, if you go to some parts of Europe and the Middle East, you'll find them hanging in the windows of businesses, by front doors of homes. And it's a very widespread amulet to ward off any type of negative energy, really. But initially it was developed to protect against the evil eye.
No, even I never knew about that. That's fascinating. Okay, Brooke is in Greenlee, Colorado, first-time caller. Brooke, welcome to the program. Good morning. Good evening.
Hey, good morning, George and David.
Hi.
Hey, Brooke.
Hey, hi. I had an experience about 13 years ago that's quite different from the experiences you're talking about. I worked in a psychiatric hospital on an adolescent unit in Ventura, California, and I worked the night shift, and I would often find myself hanging out in the night with the kids that couldn't sleep. And there was this one young fellow that couldn't sleep, and he was in his room. I was in his room sitting on a desk, and he wasn't 2 feet away from me. And I was looking straight in his eye. We were talking, and all of a sudden his eyes went black, just like that, bam, like in that Men in Black movie, But they went black, and he was leaning up against the wall with his arms crossed, and it was almost like he became really embarrassed about it. And he gently pushed me out of the way, ran past me out of the room, down the hall, jumped over the nurse's desk, did like a karate roll back up on his feet, and ran into the padded cell room, slammed the door, and wouldn't come out for the rest of my shift. And I'm as sure that happened as I'm sure of talking to you now, man. But he had a family. So the other children on the unit knew him from school. So it's a little different, I mean, so I thought you might be interested in hearing that story. I don't know if anything like that has come up in your research or not, but yeah, it has
actually. I really appreciate you calling in with that. There's actually an account in Strange Intruders about a gentleman who, associated with two people that he knew for a little time. He would go to their home for dinner and so forth, and he was living in Hawaii at the time, and he was having dinner with them one evening, and the experience that he had was sitting across the table from this couple, and all of a sudden just something happened that he said the vibration was just kind of strange. He looked up at them, and their eyes suddenly turned solid black. Now, he had known these people for some time and had never seen anything unusual or anything like this happen. And, he just had this deep sense of dread, and he saw this happen. He said that time sort of froze. He got away from the situation as quickly as he could, and it only lasted for a few seconds or so, but he is absolutely sure of what he saw. And he got away from these people as quickly as he could. They acted very strange when they saw him, after that, and he avoided having any close contact with them after that point. But it really altered a lot of things in his life, and some strange things happened to him. He developed a couple of phobias that he had never had before, and there have been a few other accounts where people have had the same experience. They've seen people whose eyes suddenly shift from just a normal human eye to being solid black. And that's a weird connection that I'm honestly not quite sure what to make of it at this point. There's nothing that really relates to it too much in traditional lore. I mean, some demonic cases or cases of possession, people describe things like that. But other than that, it's a really strange variation on these encounters.
Are there similarities beyond just the black eyes with these children? Do the personalities all stay the same?
With the children, some of the commonalities we find are pale or pasty skin. Some people say the skin doesn't even look quite real, like it's artificial. The monotone voice is fairly common. The age range of the children always seems to fall around the same age range. It's pretty typical for them to vanish very suddenly, when the encounter comes to an end. And the insistence is very common. They always insist to come inside, to be invited inside, whether it's a vehicle or a store or a home.
Let's go to Chris, Kingston, Canada. Hey, Chris, how are you? Go ahead.
Marvelous, George. First time caller, long time listener.
Great.
I had an encounter last week, I guess you could say. I'm a nighttime patrolman. I drive the roads at night looking for snow and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
We live near the border, I guess you could say. And you're driving along and you catch something out of the corner of your eye. So I decided I'd go up and turn around. Now, what I pictured in my mind was a person wearing a black suit, black hat, and couldn't really see the person's face. Now, when I drove up on the person, it was a long black hood. He had his head down. And
oh, boy.
I'm also a volunteer firefighter, so I rolled the window down to talk to the fellow to ask if he was all right because, we haven't had a warm winter up here. And the guy talked in one monotone voice. And he said he wasn't all right. He had been up for several days, and I found this really odd, and he wanted a ride.
Oh.
So I said, well, sir, unfortunately, I'm in a vehicle owned by the municipality, and I can't give you a ride. So I drove up the road, and I left. It stuck with me for a couple minutes, and I decided I'd call the police. Now, I called the police, and they showed up, and they said, great. And I said, what do you mean great? He's been going door to door, knocking on people's doors.
This guy has been? Wow.
Yeah. And the weird thing about it, this is 1:30 in the morning. I'm listening to your show, and, you always listen to it to pass the time. And I turned the radio off. I couldn't listen to anything anymore. And they said, well, and it was two female cops, police, sorry. And they said, well, Chris, where is he? And I said, well, he's up the road quite a ways. I paced myself away from him. And they said, okay, well, we're going to go ahead. There's more cars on the way and whatnot. They got up to the gentleman, and I decided, well, they got their lights on and everything. I drove by, and now at this time, the gentleman had his hood off, and all I remember is him looking at me, and his eyes were black.
Oh, jeez.
You couldn't see white. You couldn't see nothing. I told my wife about this, and she goes, are you crazy, Chris? I said, no. And then you guys telling this story tonight, even right now, the hair on the back of my neck is up, let me tell you guys.
The adult version, David, of one of these things.
I'd say he was about probably in his 40s. I'm 30 years older than I was, or appeared to be older than I was.
Good thing you didn't give him a ride, Chris.
Well, I'm glad we're not allowed to give people a ride.
That's true. What do you think of this, David?
We referenced this briefly earlier tonight, George. More and more of these cases showing up of adults with black eyes. There was quite a case last summer with a couple of associates of mine, J.C. Johnson and Jack Carey from the Crypto Four Corners group, and they were investigating a case in New Mexico, driving in sort of in the middle of nowhere, close to Gallup, though, and just out on this road, sort of going nowhere towards the reservation, and they see a figure walking on the side of the road. JC and Jack were in the back seat of this car. There was a driver and a passenger in the front. They slowed down. They saw that it was a young woman, and she was walking in the desert, George. She was wearing 6-inch cork heels and what they described as a tattered one-piece jumpsuit. And they were concerned that something was wrong with this person. So, like the caller, they pulled aside, and JC rolled the window down and said, "Hey, miss, are you okay?" And she turned and looked at them and said, "Fine, everything I need." And when she turned and looked directly at Jack and JC, they realized her eyes were solid black. So, JC gets very disoriented, and they're immediately telling the driver to, go, travel away. And so similar to some of these other cases, in the aftermath of this, they had some, physical issues, a lot of disorientation. Jack became, feeling very violently ill, almost to the point of vomiting. And, a lot of issues with JC felt like he was overheating, and a very strange burning sensation in his head. So, again, this is a female adult, the middle of nowhere with solid black eyes. It's just a very bizarre case, and more of these incidents showing up with adults.
Are most of these cases during the daytime or the nighttime?
No, they tend to be more. A lot of the initial cases when I investigated them were, right in the evening, just before sundown. But the more you dig into it, the more you'll find that there are cases at all hours. Of the
so
day
they're not
night.
like little vampire kids or anything.
Yeah, they tended to be a little bit more common in the early evening or the early hours of the morning. So sort of those off times when people are winding down from work, or when people are maybe just getting up or just beforehand.
Let's squeeze Tim in New York in, if we can. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here. I just had a quick question.
Sure.
I was reading some threads on social networks, BuzzFeed, that kind of stuff, and one of the things I noticed with these kids, they came in pairs, and the stories I was reading is that every time they knocked on a house, they wanted to call their mom. I was just wondering if that's something you came across when it came to these kids, and have you ever heard of that? That's pretty much it. Thank you, George.
Sure thing. David, 30 seconds.
The questions are always different, in the cases I've investigated. They'll say they need to come inside to get a drink of water, or, they just want to stop in for a while. Phrases that don't really make any sense for the location they're visiting because the people don't know them.
Hey, kid, I'll bring you a glass of water. Stay right there. That's what we need to do. David, as usual, thank you so much. What's your next project?
The next project, George, is actually a book on the jinn, which is close to completion.
Looking good. As soon as it's done,
out this summer.
Come on back on, okay?
Oh, it sounds fantastic.
Super.
Always good to chat with you.
All right, David Weatherly, the book, of course, The Black-Eyed Children.